I, 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 I got a letter from the government the other day. I opened and read it and burned that. Man, the way that I live don't concern that. Man, we gon' have to settle this another.
Welcome to another edition of Critical Insight in Your World News. I'm your host, Solomon Kamajan, and our featured guest today is none other than Pepe Escobar of Asia Times. Pepe Escobar is a roving correspondent for Asia Times. He's a journalist, and quite frankly, one of the best out there in terms of getting critical analysis surrounding geopolitical issues and stories that the Western media often suppress. So, Pepe, thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. My pleasure. Greetings from Southeast Asia. Not the South China Sea, but Southeast Asia for me.
Thank you. And I'd like to actually get started. If you can tell us, I was reading a piece that mentioned you on RT, and it was an article, and I sense this is hot in the news right now. I want to start with this story. Can you talk to us about the National Security Agency's, the United States' National Security Agency's program known as Prism, and this connection with James Snowden, who leaked this classified information to the Guardian, and now it's this big story. What are your thoughts about this?
Well, look, what Daniel Ellsberg of the Pentagon Papers said is absolutely correct. This is the biggest leak in U.S. history, in fact, because of the size of the whole thing, because Snowden was an insider, because he had access to all the flows and how the matrix over there in the black hole, the NSA system, which includes not only the NSA, but that famous business corridor in the Baltimore-Washington Parkway, where you have all those contractors working for the NSA, and the revolving door between the government and private initiative, and the privatization of spying, which in my view is the most important thing in all that. So yes, if you compare to the Pentagon Papers 40 years ago, this is much, much bigger. It's not that, let's talk about ourselves in terms of political journalists who have been following U.S. foreign policy for a while. Of course, we knew bits and pieces. The thing is that what Snowden is telling us now, and Glenn Greenwald already said that he has access to a lot of documents, and here are documents will be exposed to the public in the next few weeks or months, is how this matrix works, how the black hole works. And that's what it's fascinating. I hope that in the next batch of documents that we're going to have access to, we have a much clearer idea of how the whole thing works. But it's crazy because there's some fascinating John le Carré spy thriller elements to the whole thing. Like the fact that one big company, Booz Allen Hamilton, in fact, which is controlled by the Carlyle Group, basically is the big brother in all this, the largest private contractor to the NSA. And so we can infer from all this that, in fact, one big company is surveilling America and the world, in fact, including non-U.S. citizens outside of the U.S., which applies to all of us here in Asia, in Europe, in South America, everywhere. And it is absolutely crazy in terms of the George Orwell scenario. Right. Now we have an equivalent of Big Brother in real life that we can directly relate to, and it's spying on us all the time. With data, metadata, algorithms, cross-reference, you name it. But basically spying on everything that we do in the digital world. And this is something that I alluded to in my piece today for Asia Times. Peter Lee, writing for Counterpunch, also mentioned it. The Moon of Alabama blog also mentioned it. It's something that Michel Foucault wrote in his absolutely outstanding masterpiece, Discipline and Punish, which was published in the US in 1975, but the French original is from 72, 73. where he analyzed the panopticon, which is a Jeremy Bentham 18th century invention of the perfect system. Prism was supposed to be in a factory, but then was adapted to a prison, to how to survey the prisoners 24 hours 7. At the time, it was a glass tower in the middle surrounded by cells. Now we don't need that. Now we have a digital panopticon observing, spying on us all the time. And that's the great thing about what Snowden did, because now he's imprinting in the mind of virtually everybody in the world that bothers to read what he's talking about or watching his first interview so far, how this thing works.
Yeah, and I wanted to, you kind of alluded to it when you were talking about Big Brother, and you know, here in the U.S., it's the land of I would say the most effective propaganda machine the world has ever known. Joseph Goebbels would be blushing in his grave right now, in his fiery pit from hell. I'm sure right now saying, man, that's a damn good propaganda machine. So many Americans have actually bought into this and think that, yeah, giving up, my privacy is something that I'm willing to do to get some added securities. What are some of the things that the typical American should know in terms of the ramifications surrounding this spy program, and also coupling that with the NDAA and the Patriot Act? What kind of nefarious ramifications could this potentially have for Americans down the line?
Well, it's something that's been going on since 9/11 and since the Patriot Act was approved. It's the absolute erosion of the fundamental tenets of the U.S. Constitution, which is absolutely essential in itself for the whole Western developed and developing world as well. It's something that obviously, if you analyze it from a Russian or a Chinese point of view, maybe it's not such a big deal. But for us in the West, it is. For U.S. democracy, it is. And the way this Orwellian universe of total information awareness and surveillance is encroaching on all of us, this is extremely serious business. So I'm reading a lot of comments, I'm reading a ton of pieces these past few days on the Snowden case, and I love to read the comments in U.S. press and online. All sorts of ideological inclinations, and sometimes it's very frightening because you see a lot of Americans that still defend the system, right, because they parrot obviously official White House, Pentagon, CIA propaganda that we're protecting our freedoms, blah blah blah, so they won't attack us here. There's not a shred of evidence that all this Prism metadata business is protecting Americans from, some crazy Islamist that decides to mount an attack on U.S. soil. Not at all. Not at all. It's the system itself is the big game. When Eisenhower talked about the industrial military complex, he would have had no idea how it would become. Because the system has a life of its own. In fact, it's a separate mechanism from society. It involves big bucks, billions, perhaps trillions of dollars, huge corporations, the revolving door, especially when we were talking about around D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. And it has a life on its own, and it's not accountable. That's one of the other great things about this Snowden thing. Maybe Americans, especially, I'm sure a lot of people in Europe think that governments should be accountable. The Brits are starting to question their own surveillance system as well. Started, a day or two, at least it's already started. But Americans have to start questioning, okay, what is this for? Is this for my own protection? Or basically this is a gigantic post-capitalist racket. Right. And that's what it is, basically.
Definitely. And switching tracks a little bit, I wanted to ask you, I have a couple questions I'd like to ask you regarding Syria, but I'd like to start off because this is a country and a conflict that you're no stranger to. You've written copious amounts of articles and columns around, Syria and this conflict.
Yeah.
What is the genesis of this conflict? What should folks know? What is the genesis of this conflict? How did it start? And we'll go from there.
Wow, I'll try to be as concise as possible because we could go on for hours on Syria. Look, you remember when it started over 2 years ago, almost 2.5 years ago, in fact. It was being spun in the West, not only in the West, but in Europe as well, as part of the Arab Spring. It was not, from the beginning. A few years ago, before I was going to Iraq at the time, I spent a lot of time between Damascus and Aleppo. And I was talking to the Syrian Google generation, basically. And they were always telling me, look, it's impossible to have a democratic movement here. First of all, because all political parties, opposition political parties, democratic political parties are bad. This is a police state. We would like to have at least a more amenable system, even if not a Western parliamentary democracy, the classical thing. But this is going to take like years to happen. It didn't. The thing is, there was a secular urge, especially in Damascus and Aleppo, the two big cities, for more democracy. As soon as there were some, the embryo of some the first demonstrations, the whole thing was immediately hijacked by foreign powers. And I'm not talking only about the US, I'm talking about the Brits, the French, and especially Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Why? Because their agenda is not our agenda in the West. Saudi Arabia, they want Muslim Brotherhood in power in Syria. And, I'm sorry, Qatar would like a Muslim Brotherhood power in Syria because the official foreign policy of Qatar is support for Muslim Brotherhood everywhere, no matter which strand. And there are many different strands. And Saudi Arabia, they would like some sort of emirate, like themselves, a hardcore Sunni government or, ultra-hardcore government with very good relations with Saudi, so the Saudis could invest over there and make some extra bunch of cash. The thing is, the first real hardcore demonstrations started in the margins of Syria, not in the capital Damascus. They started in Dera. Dera is near the Jordanian border. It's a very poor place. It's in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing. And a lot of jihadis, historically, traditionally, also came from that region. It's Sunni, it's poor, it's very conservative. They think they are neglected by Damascus, and obviously they would like things to change. But what they have in mind would be some sort of Taliban-esque sort of government. We cannot even say government, in fact, but authority. And then this whole thing started expanding to other parts of the Sunni territory. Syria is very interesting because if you look at Syria as a whole, it's impossible because I would say like 60-65% of the country in the east, most is desert. There's nothing there. Then on the western part of Syria, you have a corridor from Damascus to Aleppo, going through Homs and Hama. And here you find the business classes, you find Sunnis, Alawis, Christians. And then in the northeast, you see the Kurds more or less isolated, living in the mountains. So the country is more or less already divided in three. Of course, don't forget that Syria is an artificial creation. It was part of the division of the Middle East after the First World War, where the Brits got half, the French got the other half. Syria was part of it. And at the time, it was Greater Syria. It included Lebanon, it included the original Palestine, it included everything that was later dismembered. So, in fact, the older Syrian generations, they're always talking about Greater Syria because they grew up in Greater Syria when it was part of the Ottoman Empire. And they consider Lebanon as part of Syria. And many of them consider Palestine a part of Syria as well. So the powers that be nowadays, they looked at the map and they said, oh, this is our great chance to unravel what was done 100 years ago between the Brits and the French. So let's get, if not the whole package, Syria. If we balkanize it, why not? We keep the parts that we want. But then, the agendas started to conflict because the West wants one thing, the Brits want another, the French want another, the Turks and the Qataris want another, and the Turks, which are neighbors with Syria as well, they have some designs on Syria historically. After all, they were the Ottoman Empire before. They would like to have in Syria a system very close to what they have in Turkey, which is moderate, but not that moderate as we've seen lately, Islamist government. And we would like to sell that model to the rest of the Arab world, the AKP Turkish Democratic Islamic model. So you have different agendas competing all the time. That explains why this is basically a proxy war. And who's in the crossfire, caught in the crossfire from the beginning? The Syrian population. Right. Nobody's asking Syrians what do they want. So when we had the latest informal poll, which was conducted by relief organizations and human rights groups inside Syria, they say, look, this is informal. You cannot have a normal Gallup poll in a country in the middle of a civil war. But we talk different groups, different etc. And the results are stark. 70% they said they prefer to stick with the Assad government, even if they don't agree with it. 10% said they were neutral, and only 20% supported the so-called rebels, which is this motley crew of opportunists, defectors, gangsters, jihadis, beheaders, you name it, and mercenaries, especially, paid by Saudi Arabia and Qatar. So this thing could go on for years, just like the Lebanese civil war in the 70s, which for some of the players involved, the big foreign powers, it's not such a bad deal. Right. The thing is, for the Brits and the French, let's say, the Brits and the French, at the same time, they're trying to get a NATO no-fly zone over Syria. It's impossible. It will be voted at the UN Security Council. The Qataris and the Saudis will keep weaponizing these crazy rebels, whatever the West decides to do. They're already bombing the US-Russia organized the Geneva talks, which were supposed to be this month in June, probably is going to be next month in July. It probably will never take place because the opposition already said we're not going. Why not? Because they say, we only go if we get weapons. They have been saying this for 2 years now. Give us hardcore weapons. That's the only thing. If you give us hardcore weapons, we will go after Damascus, which is not the case. When they went after Damascus a few months ago, the thing lasted 1 day, and then they were expelled. So the stalemate can go on. I would say not only for months, but for years. Right. It's horrible. But there are some people who are profiting from it. For instance, Israel is profiting from it because the Syrian army now it's pegged inside, and they cannot do anything because there's a civil war in their own country, so they cannot have any designs of Israel. Not that they had before, but anyway. The Obama administration, obviously, it's very complicated because from the beginning, Obama, he painted himself into a corner. He said Assad must go. Right. So two and a half years later, Assad's still there, and Obama is still saying Assad must go. It doesn't make sense. This makes sense. They know the only way Assad must go would be a no-fly zone, would be a declaration of war against Syria. Yes. I'm not sure the Obama administration wants another land war in the Middle East. That's number one. So what are the options? Okay, we weaponize the rebels. They see what does that mean. Most of the weapons channeled by Qatar, Saudi Arabia, channeled through Turkey, some of them paid by the CIA, some of them screened by the CIA, whatever, they end up in the hands of the hardcore fighters. And most of them are jihadis. They're beheading time.
Terrorists.
So, exactly, terrorists. The guys who are, it's impossible to try to sell these people as freedom fighters, as a lot of right-wingers in the US fighters. It's absolutely impossible. Only people with an IQ of a fly will. So you cannot weaponize these people. So what are you going to do? There are no good. All the solutions are absolutely horrible. The only possible solution is what the Russians have been saying for what 2 years now. All the players sit down, including everybody in the opposition. If it's 25 groups, okay, whatever, 25 groups, the government, all these players that we talked about, US, France, Britain, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey, Iran as well, because they have interest in the region. Israel, even Israel should be there because they also have interests in the region. And then we find, of course, first a ceasefire, then everybody sit at the same table, then work out a roadmap towards something that already exists. It's in the Syrian constitution. Elections in 2014, so we're there. Yeah. So from now to 2014, you could have a roadmap, there will be elections, and if people want to boot out the Assad government, they can do it. But in the ballot box. So this would be the rational adult solution for the whole crisis, right? It's not going to happen. We all know that. Right. So this thing could be going on, as I said, for years.
For years.
Tragic. It's absolutely tragic.
Definitely. Tens and tens of more thousands of people stand to lose their lives. Why is the U.S. so damn threatened by Russia's involvement? Since day one, they seem to be just besides themselves with Russia's involvement, in this conflict and Russia's dealings with the Assad regime. Why is, and it seems like as you said, the Russian roadmap is a lot more diplomatic than what the U.S. And its Western allies have in place.
Well, it's a lot of factors. Again, trying once again to be very concise. They have they have access to a naval base in the Eastern Mediterranean, in the port of Tartus. When the Russian Black Sea fleet goes to the Mediterranean, they go to this port, Tartus. They do this once a year, every year. So it's a key naval base for the Russians, and they will never abdicate it because it's their presence in the Eastern Mediterranean. From the point of view of NATO, this is absurd because NATO, they consider the Mediterranean to be a NATO lake. So, they have been, over these past few years, methodically trying to extinguish any sort of opposition. Libya was part of that opposition because Gaddafi was unreliable, and they needed to control Libya. Look at what is Libya now, a failed state run by militias. But they got their wish. They sort of control Libya. Lebanon is complicated because of Hezbollah. So sooner or later, they're going to try to do something against Hezbollah specifically, via Israel or via themselves, NATO, if they had the chance. Syria, they saw the opening. Oh, this is our opening to get rid of the Russian base at Tartus. Obviously, they're always underestimating the Russians, and especially Putin. You cannot underestimate Putin. This is something that you learn on the job. And obviously, these people are not learning on the job. So Putin said, okay, if you have anything to trade or to offer me, I would consider abandoning the Mediterranean. Obviously, the Americans have nothing to offer Russia. We'll say, get rid of Tartus and what? Nothing. So the Russians, they are not going to lose key client in the Arab world, not only because of the base, of course, but because they buy weapons from Russia as well. They do business. So, and it's a very important channel for Russia to influence politics in the Arab world as well. They're not going to give up that. Forget it. Out of the question. So, once again, we come back to no options because the Americans have nothing to offer. Not to mention the Brits and the French. This is an old neo-colonial reflex on the part of both of them. They think that they still have any sort of influence in the Middle East. They don't, the Brits and the French. So, this is the basic Russian angle in the whole thing. And of course, the Americans think that going after Syria will be the weak link in the so-called axis of resistance. This is what people in Iran, in Syria, and in Lebanon, Hezbollah call it the axis of resistance against, of course, NATO and Western imperialism, as they describe it. So if you go after Syria, the link between Iran, Syria, and Hezbollah disappears. Wrong. Absolutely wrong as well. First of all, because Iran would find, and they have other ways to ship weapons to Hezbollah if they want to. It doesn't have to be necessarily through Syria. And there's no guarantee that the next Syrian government will go to establish itself against Iran. It would be a really bad move because the retaliation would be really, really hardcore. So, it's all based on hypotheticals, the whole thing, Right. It's completely absurd. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense at all. And it proves once again that the Obama administration, when they look at the Middle East, they never have a organized, concrete, evolving policy. It's like they're making policy ad hoc from one day to another. And then they paint themselves into corners and they cannot, imagine a creative solution, which is always a diplomatic solution. It's not a military solution. There's no military solution for the Middle East. The Saudis, the House of Saud, they dream about it. If they have the chance, they will. In fact, King Abdullah was asking Obama, why don't you go there and bomb the Iranians? This is their idea of a solution for the Middle East problem. It's completely absurd.
Definitely. What is the significance of the Syrian army's recent victory in Qusar on June 5th?
It's very, very, very important because Qusar was near the supply route to the rebels coming from Lebanon. It was not coming from Hezbollah territory, which is southern Lebanon. It was coming from the Bekaa Valley, which is northern part of Lebanon. But it went by Qusayr to go to this corridor I was talking about that goes through Homs and Hama. Once you get Qusayr back, their supply routes are gone over there. And that's what they did. It took them a long time to organize, get their act together. And first of all, they encircled the city. This was 6 months ago, a long time ago. Then they attracted other brigades from Aleppo to come to Qusayr as well to defend it. And when they have everybody encircled, they attacked. So they won this, the conquest of Qusayr. It took 2 weeks. Was relatively fast, in fact. But it was essential because now, if you look at the news, now they're going north. They're going towards Aleppo. And now we're going to have another battle in the suburbs of Aleppo to get them back, to recover them. I think it's two or three suburbs, basically. It's not Aleppo, the city. When you read in the news, Aleppo controlled by the rebels, no. When they were near downtown Aleppo, in fact, the local population revolted because they saw how these people were trying to not even disorganize daily life. Sharia law, beheading, amputation, getting local people as hostages. Completely absurd. So now they were expelled to the outskirts. They set fire to part of the souk in Aleppo. It's one of the most beautiful souks and markets in the whole Middle East. Historic, it's been there for 2,000 years. And when they were retreating, they set fire to 70% of it. Completely absurd. It's the livelihood of a lot of businessmen in Aleppo. Right. So the population saw that these people were against the local people of Aleppo. It was a graphic expression to them of what these gangs are all about. So assuming the Syrian army controls the whole of Aleppo within the next 2, 3 months, we're back almost to square zero because the rebels will be controlling patches of desert and villages. Who cares?
Yeah, right.
It's not important, you know. There will be nothing to negotiate, in fact. and that's the mentality of the Syrian government at the moment. They said, look, we go to Geneva and discuss with whoever shows up from the part of the opposition. But they know that the opposition doesn't want to go. First of all, because they cannot get their act together. Second, because the only way to do it is if they had enough weapons, and they don't. And third, because they're losing on the ground. You know.
My last question, thank you so much. I appreciate it. My last question for you, and I thank you so much for your time today, is if you can give us some your insight regarding the recent protest in Turkey.
Hadi tut. Kaldır. Kalk. Kaldır biraz.
And protests against the government and Erdogan. You know, what do you make of these protests? What does it mean?
Wow. I love your questions because you give me, okay, can I get 2 hours? Look, basically, a lot of people have been saying that this is some kind of conspiracy. Even Erdogan himself, Prime Minister Erdogan from Turkey, he's been saying that this was a foreign conspiracy. No, this was legitimate, authentic, and spontaneous. I talked to a lot of people that went to Taksim Square and Gezi Park, or some university professors that know very well what's been going on in Turkey for the past 10 years or so. And yes, it is absolutely spontaneous and legitimate, and it was a crystallization of a lot of resentment that had been building for years. Because Erdogan is too autocratic and authoritarian, because of these stupid laws, Islamism light that also include banning sale of alcohol, that kind of stuff. The new secular generation, especially in a big city like Istanbul, which is a very cosmopolitan city, for them is a little bit too much. They mirror themselves in Western youth, not in a Taliban-style state that doesn't even exist anymore. Or, not to mention the Persian Gulf petromonarchies, right? To give an example, in Qatar, if you want to go to a sports bar, you have to show your passport to get in. Because if you're a Muslim and you live there, you're not allowed because they sell alcohol, right? So it's just only for foreigners. So the Turks don't want to live in a society like this. They see where this is going, in the long term. And there's another element which is even more important, which is the economic miracle in Turkey these past few years has a lot to do with the real estate speculation bubble. And this is organized by the AKP in power with foreign investors. Most of them are from the Gulf. They are Saudis, they are Emiratis, they are Kuwaitis. So, and it's very interesting because why Taksim Square and why this little park over there? They wanted to get rid of the park to build a replica of an Ottoman building and with a huge shopping mall. What else? People noticed that this was the tip of an iceberg, and the huge iceberg, the real estate iceberg, is an expansion of Istanbul. They want to build a third bridge, a third over the Bosphorus, a third port, colonize the north part of town with condos all over. So it's an enormous real estate speculation bubble. And they want to get rid of that little park, which has historical value for the local people in Istanbul. And they say, no, this is a little bit too much. It was the example for them. So, okay, let's occupy this place and show them that, if you want to recolonize and, infest Istanbul with condos, do it somewhere else, not here. This is our space, and this is a public space. So it was very similar in some aspects to Occupy New York, to Occupy in Madrid as well. It was an environmental movement, but it was also a political idea behind it as well. And spontaneous. The thing is, you cannot go against the AKP's economic interests like this. And that explains the brutal police repression. And nowadays, for example, today, as we speak, a few hours ago, the police went there and they cleared Taksim Square completely and pushed the protesters towards the little park over there. And Erdogan already said, no, our plans to get rid of the park, go on. He's going to meet with the protesters, but I'm not sure he's going to listen. He's not that kind of person. Yeah. And first of all, because he thinks he's immune to criticism because the countryside in Turkey, Anatolia, the big part of Turkey in Asia, they support him. He's still very popular over there. He's not very popular in Istanbul and Ankara, the big cities. That's the problem. So how this thing is going to evolve from now on depends on how Erdogan is going to treat the protests. If he keeps antagonizing them and treating them like he said, vandals, terrorists, riff-raff. These are, in Turkish, these are the terms he applied, This thing could radicalize long term. If he has a little bit of diplomacy in him, which sometimes he displays, not very often, he can say, okay, I'll keep the park, I'll build a mosque nearby the park, no shopping mall, etc., but this thing has to stop now. I'm not sure this is not going to happen. This could be maybe the beginning of a series of protests long term. And then we're going to see in the next elections what's going to happen. These people now, they have to organize themselves into a political party. If they are against what the AKP is doing, and they are against of this soft Islamization or re-Islamization of Turkey, they have to combat this politically. So I think the first stage is over. Now they have to go on, you know, step up their game.
Right, definitely. Pepe, I want to thank you so much for you know, blessing us with this wealth of information you've given us, and we really appreciate the work that you do and Asia Times in general. And folks, this is Pepe Escobar. He's one of the best in the business. I'm not just saying that. This is you need to visit Asia Times and Google his name, and trust me, you're going to get a perspective and insight and a wealth of information. Especially if you're here in the West, if you're anywhere in the U.S., you're going to see that it doesn't mesh up with what MSNBC, Fox News, CNN, ABC are putting out there. That's because their job is to obfuscate. You know, they are Big Brother. Their job is to perpetuate the propaganda coming out of the White House and Pentagon. And so your work is quite frankly invaluable. So I want to thank you for your time today.
My pleasure, as we do it here in Thailand. Thanks everybody.
That's Pepe Escobar. I'm Salman Kamajan. This is Critical Insights. Thank you.
I got a letter from the government the other day. How open and ready and burn that. Man, the way that I live don't concern that. Man, we gon' have to settle this another way. A letter from the government the other day. How